Hello friends, I hope you're having a fantastic day and welcome to Insight 360. In today's video, we will dive into the world of climate change promises and how they stack up against our finances. Can we afford the utopian future our politicians are selling us? Let's have a look. In a world primarily focused on an environmentally sustainable future, we seem to be paying less and less attention on having a financially sustainable future. Most politicians constantly strive to outdo each other with increasingly draconian and often unrealistic environmental measures, supposedly to save the environment. Little attention is given to how we as a society are supposed to pay for all these wonderful ideas. If someone raises the question of the enormous investments needed to reach net zero, the answer is always the same: doing nothing would cost a lot more. Whether or not that is true is a topic for a different video. In this video, we will focus on a different and even more fundamental question. Can we as a society afford all the measures proposed by politicians? And if we can, what would the effect be on our economies and our personal well-being? Back in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, the dominant economic philosophy in most Western governments emphasized the importance of balancing the budget, reducing public debt, and limiting government spending. Influenced by neoliberal economic principles, the drive for fiscal conservatism was grounded in the belief that high levels of government debt could lead to inflation, crowd out private investment, and hinder economic growth. Moreover, the idea to leave behind a large debt for future generations to pay back was frowned upon. This period saw significant efforts to implement austerity measures, reduce public expenditures, and, in some cases, achieve budget surpluses. However, the urgency to maintain fiscal discipline has seemingly diminished in recent years, with many governments in developed economies showing greater willingness to incur ever larger deficits. Several factors contribute to this shift. The sustained period of low interest rates following the global financial crisis of 2008 made borrowing cheaper for governments, reducing the immediate financial pressure to balance budgets and allowing for increased spending without the same level of concern for the cost of debt servicing. The resurgence of Keynesian economic thought, which advocates for active government intervention in the economy, especially during downturns, has influenced policy decisions. Additionally, the concept of modern monetary theory, which suggests that countries controlling their currency can sustain higher levels of public debt without defaulting, has gained traction among some policymakers and academics. The COVID-19 pandemic prompted unprecedented fiscal responses to support healthcare systems, protect jobs, and prevent economic collapse. The acceptance of large deficits was seen as a necessity rather than a choice, further normalizing the practice of significant government borrowing. A growing consensus on the urgent need to address climate change, requiring substantial investment in green technologies, renewable energy, and infrastructure to transition to net zero economies. Alongside, there is increased attention to social issues such as income inequality, healthcare, and education, which demand significant public resources. These priorities have often overshadowed traditional concerns about fiscal conservatism. The political landscape in many countries has changed, with a greater emphasis on addressing immediate and tangible societal challenges over abstract economic principles. Public and political appetite for austerity has diminished, particularly following the social and economic fallout from the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. While the shift away from strict fiscal conservatism allows for immediate investment in many areas, it also raises questions about long-term debt sustainability and the ability of governments to respond to future crises. One of the consequences of letting go of fiscal discipline can be experienced daily: inflation. While it's not easy to attribute one reason for the current high inflation in most Western countries, most economists agree that the enormous stimulus packages doled out during the COVID pandemic by governments contributed greatly to the phenomenon. And it seems many governments in the Western world still haven't gotten the memo that the endless borrowing needs to stop. That is, if you are serious about curtailing inflation. Stimulus packages with lovely names like Inflation Reduction Act do anything but reduce inflation. Quite the opposite, actually. But although inflation is hurting a lot of people right now, it's the long-term effect of all this borrowing that really seems to remain unrecognized. At some point, the money needs to be paid back. The belief that we can, with an aging population, grow ourselves out of this mess is overly optimistic at best. Moreover, as we are curtailing our economies more and more with an ever-growing cabal of environmental regulations companies need to adhere to, economic growth is bound to slow down. The basic economic principle that capital flows to the most efficient way of doing business is based on the fact that markets will naturally allocate resources to the most productive and cost-effective uses. However, when considering less efficient energy sources like solar and wind energy, several factors disrupt this natural allocation of capital, potentially impacting future economic growth in various ways. Governments around the world are increasingly intervening in energy markets to encourage the adoption of renewable energy sources. Through subsidies, tax incentives, and mandates, these policies alter the economic landscape by making less efficient energy sources more financially viable and attractive to investors. This diverts capital from more efficient energy sources to renewables, which may have higher upfront costs or lower efficiency but are favored for their environmental benefits. These government interventions are bound to lead to malinvestments. By that we mean investments that will never create any meaningful return and thus destroy capital. Politicians act as if they know which technology will be the best to employ going forward. A choice we believe should be left to the market and entrepreneurs. This central planning approach by people with little to no experience in entrepreneurship seems foolish and is bound to leave other and perhaps better alternatives undiscovered. Using less efficient forms of energy not only destroys capital that is invested in it, but it also acts as a brake on future economic growth. If companies have to use less efficient and thus more expensive forms of energy, they cannot produce as much for the same amount of capital as they otherwise could. This leaves an economy with fewer products or with the same amount but more expensive, stifling economic growth. It is, of course, possible that solar and wind energy will be able to produce energy more efficiently and thus cheaper than fossil fuels in the future. This is exactly what is being promised all the time. Realistically, though, with the current state of technology, we find this claim highly doubtful. First of all, solar and wind are intermittent forms of energy, so we will always need backup generation. For those moments, solar and wind will not produce enough. This means keeping those old gas, oil or coal plants operational with all the cost involved. Or we need massive battery parks to store energy when we have too much of it. Both these scenarios lead to a situation where we need massive infrastructure that is only sparingly used. Not a very efficient way to allocate capital. Another point many people seem to gloss over is that we are only talking about electricity here. Fossil energy sources are used for a whole host of applications. Oil in particular is used for a whole host of products that cannot be offset with wind or solar. Ironically, a lot of components for solar panels and wind turbines are made from oil, but to give you an idea, here are some of the most common products derived from oil. 1. Synthetic fertilizer. 2. Gasoline, diesel, kerosene and heating oil. 3. Almost all plastics. 4. Synthetic rubber. 5. Many chemicals used in modern manufacturing. 6. Aspirin. 7. Many lotions and creams. 8. Polyester and nylon used in clothes. 9. Asphalt. 10. Detergents. 11. Ink for printers. This list illustrates the widespread use of oil in our daily lives, underscoring its importance beyond just fuel. Many of these products we simply cannot do without at the moment, and none of these will be offset by wind or solar. One of the most ironic ones on this list must be synthetic fertilizer. A big push from the environmental agenda is that we must all eat a plant-based diet. However, to grow all the plants we are supposed to eat, we need fertilizer and lots of it. There are only two forms: natural, so animal dung, or synthetic, made from oil. Thus, we need either animals or oil. If all farmers were to start growing soy and lettuce, we would need a lot of oil to create enough fertilizer. A fact many environmentalists seem to gloss over. But I digress. So let's examine whether a modern Western society can actually afford the proposed transition to net zero. In this example, we will focus on the US, but this applies just as much to the EU or any other developed Western society. A 2021 report from McKinsey & Company estimated that the United States would need to spend approximately $275 billion to $775 billion annually above current levels on physical assets for energy and land use systems alone from now until 2050 to be on a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway, which is aligned with reaching net zero emissions by 2050. The American Council for an Energy-Efficient Economy in 2020 suggested that achieving net zero emissions by 2050 would likely require a sustained investment of around 2% of the US GDP annually. Given the US GDP was about 21 trillion in 2020, this translates to roughly 420 billion in the year 2020. If we assume the economy will keep growing at a modest 2% a year, this investment will have ballooned to a staggering 760 billion per year in 2050. It's important to note that both these estimates focus on direct investments in technology and infrastructure. Achieving net zero emissions also involves indirect costs, such as policy and regulatory changes, training and workforce transition, and potential costs associated with increased energy prices or the economic impacts of carbon pricing mechanisms. All of which will most likely reduce economic growth as previously discussed, making it even harder to keep the deficit under control. The current deficit of the US government is already 1.7 trillion per year or 6.3% of GDP. This is not a situation where a government can easily increase spending to pay for a vision of net zero in 2050. Unfortunately, most other Western societies are not faring much better. Just to be clear, we are not saying nothing should be done about the environment, nor are we saying humans have no impact on it. However, this grand vision of a net zero future, as proposed by many political leaders, is fraught with financial impracticalities that are simply overlooked. The staggering costs associated with transitioning to renewable energy sources, coupled with the extensive investments required to overhaul existing infrastructure, present a financial challenge that seems insurmountable under current economic conditions. The emphasis on ambitious environmental goals often comes without a clear plan on how to finance these initiatives, pushing governments ever deeper into debt. The situation is made even more precarious by the existing deficits and the looming challenges of an aging Western population. The focus on singular government-driven solutions to the climate crisis may also stifle innovation and prevent the discovery of more efficient and cost-effective alternatives. In a world where political agendas often drive decision-making, there is a risk that we might miss out on better technological solutions that could offer a more balanced approach to tackling environmental issues without compromising economic growth. It seems crucial that we re-evaluate the approach we are on in achieving an environmentally sustainable economy. While the intentions behind the push for net zero emissions are commendable, we must also consider the economic realities and the impact on future generations. Without finding a balance between environmental sustainability and financial viability, we risk implementing solutions that, while environmentally noble, could lead to economic downturns, reduced standards of living, and missed opportunities for technological advancements that could offer genuine solutions to the climate crisis. As we move forward, we must open the floor to a wider range of solutions, encourage innovation, and foster an environment where multiple approaches to environmental sustainability can be explored. Only by doing so can we hope to find a pathway to a greener future that is also economically sustainable. The challenge ahead is significant, and it will require cooperation, creativity, and a willingness to explore beyond the confines of current political narratives. That's all for this week's episode. We sincerely hope you enjoyed it and found the information provided helpful. If you have any suggestions or would like to discuss the topics covered, please feel free to leave a comment below. We'll be back soon with a brand new episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care and goodbye.